Uh, you know, there is a very specific kind of joy in taking something that looks completely mundane on the surface and realizing it's actually hiding an absolute soap opera.
Oh, absolutely. It's the best feeling.
Right. And since you are joining us for this deep dive today, I just know you're exactly the kind of lifelong learner who, lives for those moments. You're always looking for the hidden stories behind the dry
You
facts.
want to know how the gears of history actually turn, not just the dates.
Exactly. Well, today we have a mission. We are looking at a historical roster. Specifically, we're looking at the chronological list of United States senators from Alabama.
A very detailed list, I might add.
Yeah, it stretches from the state's admission to the Union, that was December 1819, all the way up to the present day in 2026.
And on the surface, I mean, it is literally just a sequence of names, dates, and party affiliations.
It looks like a spreadsheet, but if you look closely, if you really dig into it, you will see a perfect blueprint of American historical eras.
A blueprint full of drama.
So much drama. We are going to uncover surprising political maneuvering, dramatic vacancies, spouses appointing spouses, and shifting party dynamics across two entire centuries.
That's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the basic architecture of the Senate itself. Before we even get to the people, we have to understand the seats they're actually sitting in.
Right, the mechanics of it.
Yeah, because Alabama elects senators to what the text calls Class 2 and Class 3 seats. What exactly does that mean for the state's electoral cycle?
Well, it's actually a brilliant bit of constitutional engineering. It's designed to prevent total turnover.
Uh-huh.
The United States Senate has 100 seats in total, and those seats are divided into 3 overarching classes. The goal is to stagger the elections so that only about 1/3 of the entire Senate is up for re-election in any given cycle.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and because a single state only has 2 senators, those senators will always belong to 2 different classes. That ensures both of the state's seats are typically never up for election at the exact same time. For Alabama, those seats fall into Class 2 and Class 3.
So rather than a scenario where the entire government gets fired on the same day, which, let's be honest, could cause absolute chaos,
Total chaos,
it
yeah.
operates a lot more like a corporate board of directors, staggered terms. And the historical timeline shows that the Class 2 seat has its next election coming up in 2026, while the Class 3 seat will be contested next in 2028. It creates this built-in sense of continuity.
It creates institutional stability on paper, yeah.
On paper.
Exactly, because the reality of the early 1800s was anything but stable. When you trace the actual individuals holding these early seats, you realize how little continuity there truly was.
Yeah.
The early era of the Senate functioned much more like a game of musical chairs than a permanent destination.
I noticed that immediately when looking at the early 19th century timelines. We tend to think of the Senate today as the ultimate peak of a political career. People spend their whole lives trying to get there and decades trying to stay there.
Oh yeah, today it's the pinnacle.
But someone like John McKinley has a trajectory that completely shatters that modern assumption. He wins the Class 2 seat in 1826, serves for a few years, but loses his re-election bid in 1831.
Right.
Then somehow he just pops back up in 1837. Does he just run a massive comeback campaign?
He does reclaim a spot, but this time he captures the Class 3 seat. He manages to maneuver his way back into the federal legislature, but his return is incredibly short-lived. He barely unpacks his bags in Washington before he resigns that very same year.
That same year, what could possibly pull a senator away from a newly won seat so quickly?
A lifetime appointment to the United States Supreme Court.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was nominated to be a justice, and he took it without hesitation. What's fascinating here is how the Senate, during this formative era of the country, was frequently used as a stepping stone.
A stepping stone.
Yeah, it was a holding pen for ambition rather than the final peak of a political career. McKinley pivots to the Supreme Court, and he was far from the only one using the Senate as a launch pad for other federal roles.
That makes me think of Arthur P. Bagby.
Oh, perfect example.
Looking at his timeline, he gets elected in 1841, he is successfully reelected in 1842, and then midway through 1848, his tenure just abruptly ends. There isn't an election loss listed, he simply resigns.
Just packs up.
Yeah.
Where did he go?
He resigned to become the U.S. Minister to Russia.
He gave up a sitting U.S. Senate seat to be an ambassador?
He did. It tells us an enormous amount about the shifting prestige of federal roles at the time. Being a diplomatic envoy to the Russian Empire, representing the young United States on the global stage of European monarchies, was seen by Bagby as a much more compelling, or perhaps much more prestigious post than remaining in the Senate chamber.
That is wild to think about today. The early decades are really defined by this constant churn of resignations, temporary appointments, and short interrupted terms as politicians jockeyed for better positions within the expanding federal government.
That atmosphere of constant political maneuvering is fascinating. But it all comes to a very sudden, very dark halt.
Yes, it does.
Scrolling through the chronological progression of the 19th century, you inevitably hit a massive, glaring gap in the data. There is a 7-year void where the state has zero representation. From March 1861 all the way to July 1868, both of Alabama's Senate seats are completely empty.
That void represents one of the most solemn and consequential periods in American history. On January 21st, 1861, Senators Clement Claiborne Clay and Benjamin Fitzpatrick stood before the Senate and formally announced their withdrawal from the body.
I just walked out.
They walked out. Alabama had made the decision to secede from the Union, precipitating the American Civil War.
How does the federal government even handle the paperwork for something like that? When a state declares it is no longer part of the country, do the senators just leave, or is there a formal firing process?
The institutional handling of that fracture was actually quite methodical, and it differed slightly for both men, depending on the timing of their terms.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Benjamin Fitzpatrick's term was already naturally scheduled to end on March 4, 1861. The Senate simply allowed the clock to run out, and his seat became officially vacant upon expiration.
Just a technicality for him, then.
Right. Clement Claiborne Clay, however, was right in the middle of his term. For him, the Senate had to officially step in, passing a resolution on March 14, 1861, declaring his seat officially vacant.
That is so procedural for such a dramatic moment.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that 7-year block of empty space perfectly encapsulates the literal fracturing of the country.
You can almost visualize those two empty desks sitting in the Senate chamber year after year.
Gathering dust through the entirety of the Civil War.
It is a profound physical reminder of a divided nation hiding inside a timeline of dates and terms.
It is history visualized through the strict mechanisms of bureaucracy. Those seats remain unoccupied through the unimaginable violence of the war and well into the tumultuous beginnings of Reconstruction. They aren't filled again until July 13, 1868.
When the state is readmitted to representation, and when those seats are finally filled again, the political makeup is entirely transformed. The men who take the oaths in 1868 are Willard Warner and George E. Spencer, and the demographic shift here is staggering.
It's a completely new reality.
Before the 1861 walkout, the seats were held entirely by Democrats and politicians belonging to the Jacksonian faction.
The Jacksonian movement, named for Andrew Jackson, was a populist precursor to the modern Democratic Party. It dominated Southern politics in the antebellum period, fiercely advocating for state sovereignty and the interests of the agrarian South.
For decades, that was the exclusive political voice emerging from those Senate seats. But when Warner and Spencer arrive in 1868, they are both Republicans. It is a complete inversion of the political map.
A total flip.
And it is really worth noting for you, the listener, as we track these massive shifts in party representation, from the antebellum Jacksonians to the post-war Republicans and later realignments, we are simply observing the factual, chronological data points that define the eras. We aren't taking any political sides or endorsing any platforms here.
Absolutely. We are strictly maintaining a neutral look at the historical timeline, which just objectively shows a stark, immediate transition in party representation the moment the seats are reoccupied following the war.
Right.
The entire political foundation of the region had been upended. Warner and Spencer, stepping into those long vacant seats, effectively reopened the state's presence in the federal legislative branch under a completely new paradigm.
So we move from the chaotic stepping stone era of the early 1800s into the devastating institutional rupture of the Civil War. But the history continues to evolve. As we push into the 20th century, the types of conflicts begin to change.
They get much more internal.
Yes. The tension shifts from literal civil war to fierce internal bureaucratic rebellion. Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the vacancy drama of 1913.
Oh, the events of 1913 are arguably among the most bizarre procedural anomalies you will find in American legislative history.
It's wild.
It centers around a sudden vacancy. Senator Joseph F. Johnston dies in office in August of that year, leaving an empty seat that urgently needs to be filled.
And the standard procedure in many states is for the governor to appoint someone to temporarily fill the seat until an election can be held, right?
That's the standard playbook.
The timeline shows a man named Henry Delamar Clayton Jr. is initially appointed to continue the term, but he never actually serves. His appointment is challenged and eventually withdrawn entirely, so they have to try again.
The first attempt falters under legal and political scrutiny, so the state pivots. They put forward a second name, Franklin Potts Glass Sr. He is formally appointed to continue the term.
But Glass doesn't take the seat either, and it isn't because he withdrew his own name. The historical record plainly states that the United States Senate simply refused to seat him.
Just think about the sheer audacity of that moment. The state executive puts forward a chosen, appointed representative to speak on behalf of their citizens in the federal government. And the federal body itself locks the doors.
Literally.
They look at his credentials and flat out reject him.
Imagine showing up for the first day of the most prestigious job of your life, a job you were officially appointed to by your state's highest executive, and the building security essentially says, "We don't recognize your authority to be here. Go home."
It's a stunning rebuke.
That is wild. It leaves the seat vacant for nearly another full year. It isn't until May 1914 that Francis S. White is finally elected by the people to finish the term.
The refusal to seat Glass highlights the tremendous friction between state and federal authority. And that kind of internal institutional drama wasn't just limited to the appointments process. We also see fierce intra-party battles beginning to play out in the regular election cycles. Take J. Thomas Heflin in the 1930s.
Heflin is a perfect example of how fractured political alliances were becoming. He had been a fixture in the Senate, serving since 1920 and easily winning re-election in 1924. But then the political winds shift against him. In 1930, he completely loses his party's renomination.
He's ousted by his own people.
Most politicians would read the writing on the wall, give a concession speech, and retire quietly. What does Heflin do?
Heflin rebels. He refuses to accept the party's rejection. He stubbornly launches a campaign to keep his seat anyway, running as a completely independent candidate against his own former party.
He goes completely rogue. Does the gamble pay off?
It does not. He ultimately loses the general election. But his willingness to break ranks and fight his own establishment underscores how fiercely competitive and volatile internal party dynamics had become during the Great Depression era.
That volatility in the 1930s brings us to another incredible story from that decade. In 1937, we see an echo of our old friend John McKinley from the 1800s. Senator Hugo Black resigns his seat in August of that year. And just like McKinley, he is leaving for a lifetime appointment as a justice of the U.S. Supreme Court.
It is a massive elevation for Black, but it immediately creates another sudden vacancy back home. The power to appoint a temporary successor once again falls to the governor of Alabama.
And this is where the story takes a uniquely personal twist. Who does the governor choose to elevate to one of the highest legislative offices in the land?
You couldn't write it better.
His own wife. The governor appoints Dixie Bibb Graves to continue Hugo Black's term. She steps into the United States Senate.
The sheer political nerve required to make that appointment is astounding. A governor installing his spouse into the federal legislature is a fascinating intersection of political power and familial influence.
Does she serve out the remainder of the term, or was it purely a placeholder move?
Her tenure is quite brief, suggesting it was indeed a strategic placeholder. She holds the office from August 1937 until January 1938. She resigns just days after her successor, J. Lister Hill, successfully navigates and wins the highly competitive Democratic primary. She steps aside once the permanent political replacement was secured.
It is an incredible footnote in American political history. But what is truly surprising is that Dixie Bibb Graves actually sets a precedent of sorts. She wasn't the last spouse to be appointed to a Senate seat in the state's history.
She was not. If we move forward into the modern era, we see a striking parallel situation play out in 1978. Senator James Allen, who had been a significant legislative force in office since 1969, tragically died during his term. The responsibility to fill the vacancy arose again, and his wife, Mary Ann Pittman Allen, was appointed to continue his term.
Though her approach to the appointment was quite different from Dixie Bibb Graves, Graves seemed content to hold the seat temporarily and resign. Mary Ann Pittman Allen actually attempted to hold on to the power. She ran in the subsequent election to finish her husband's term, but ultimately lost the nomination later that same year.
It demonstrates how the mechanisms of succession evolve, yet certain patterns of political lineage and familial succession repeat themselves across the decades.
As we transition fully into the modern era, the nature of the political maneuvering shifts again. We move away from spousal appointments and rogue independent runs, and we enter an era of highly calculated, obscure bureaucratic gamesmanship.
The rules become the weapon.
Yes. There is a moment in 1981 that is an absolute masterclass in exploiting the rules of the institution. Let's look at the transition between Democratic Senator Donald Stewart and his successor, Republican Senator Jeremiah Denton.
This is a remarkable piece of institutional chess. Stewart had lost his bid for renomination in 1980. Jeremiah Denton had subsequently won the general election and was preparing to take over the seat. Under standard constitutional procedure, Stewart's term was officially mandated to end on January 3, 1981, at which point Denton would be sworn in.
Standard procedure. You pack up your desk, you serve until your contract expires, and the new person takes over the next day. But Stewart didn't wait until January 3rd. He submitted his official resignation on January 2nd, 1981. He quit his job exactly 1 day early.
One single day.
For anyone listening, you might wonder why on earth a sitting U.S. senator would bother resigning 24 hours before their term naturally expires. What is the strategic benefit of one single day?
In the United States Senate, 1 day is the difference between leading the pack and standing at the back of the line. The Senate operates entirely on a system of seniority. Seniority dictates everything. Which committees you sit on, whether you get to chair those committees, the size of your staff budget, and even the physical office space you were assigned. By resigning on January 2nd, Stewart intentionally created a 24-hour vacancy. This allowed the governor to officially appoint Jeremiah Denton to the seat a day early.
So sneaky.
Denton was sworn in on January 2nd, a full day before the massive incoming freshman class of senators who would all be sworn in together on January 3rd.
By beating the freshman class to the swearing-in ceremony by just 24 hours, Denton technically had more seniority than every single other new senator arriving that year. Stewart handed him a golden ticket to jump the line ahead of all his peers.
That's brilliant.
Imagine applying that kind of strategy in your own workplace, quitting at 4:59 p.m. on a Friday just so your replacement can technically get their name on the HR roster before the new fiscal year starts on Monday. It is an incredible display of collegiality and manipulation of the rule book.
It truly is. It's a quiet bureaucratic move with massive implications for a senator's long-term influence. And speaking of long-term influence, as we move into the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the chess moves become even more sweeping. We have to discuss the longest-serving senator in the state's history.
Richard Shelby. His tenure is staggering when you compare it to the constant churn of the early 1800s. He held his seat for 36 years, serving continuously from 1987 all the way to his retirement in 2023.
His 36-year run is not just notable for its length, but for a massive political milestone that occurs right in the middle of it. Shelby was originally elected in 1986 and then re-elected in 1992 as a Democrat. But in 1994, he officially changed parties, becoming a Republican.
It's a monumental data point on the historical timeline. He transitions across the aisle and goes on to be reelected as a Republican in 1998, 2004, 2010, and 2016. His individual timeline mirrors the broader, long-term political realignment of the American South during that era. And again, just a reminder to you listening, we're simply neutrally tracking the shifts provided by the data.
Exactly. He provided decades of unshakable stability in that Class 3 seat. But what is fascinating is how his eventual retirement, combined with some high-profile moves in the adjacent Class 2 seat, suddenly brought back the chaotic musical chairs of the 19th century.
History repeating itself.
The modern era has seen a rapid cascade of seat changes.
The recent turnover has been dizzying. Let's trace the Class 2 seat over just a handful of years. Jeff Sessions holds the seat solidly from 1997 until February 2017. Then he resigns to become the U.S. Attorney General.
A modern pivot to the executive branch, echoing the diplomatic and judicial appointments we saw in the 1800s.
Exactly. This kicks off a chain reaction. Luther Strange is appointed to temporarily fill the Sessions vacancy. But Strange fails to win the nomination to finish the term. This opens the door for Doug Jones, who is elected in a highly publicized 2017 special election to finish the remainder of the term.
And Jones serves until 2021.
Right, but then he loses his bid for a full re-election.
Which ultimately leads to the election of Tommy Tuberville in 2020. The seat changes hands 4 times in 4 years after being held by one man for 2 decades.
And the timeline gives us a glimpse into the near future as well, noting that Tuberville is currently serving but has announced he is retiring from the Senate to run for governor of Alabama. Meanwhile, in the Class 3 seat left open by Richard Shelby's long-anticipated retirement, Katie Britt was elected in 2022, becoming the state's current junior senator.
The history is a continuous, living document. The ink is never truly dry.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive with what appeared to be a dry, mundane list of dates, names, and political affiliations.
What it means is that history is never static, even when it's flattened into a spreadsheet.
Hmm.
This simple roster of politicians serves as a mirror reflecting America's broader evolution. You can trace the entire arc of the country's development right here in these columns.
You really can.
We saw the early era of nation building, where the Senate was a temporary stop for ambitious diplomats and future Supreme Court justices. We felt the tragic, literal division of the country through the empty desks of the Civil War. We tracked the fierce, norm-breaking rebellions of the 20th century, the audacity of spousal appointments, and the highly calculated strategic gamesmanship of the modern era. Every resignation, every appointment, every lost renomination is a vital clue to the health, tension, and priorities of the country at that exact moment in time.
It fundamentally changes how you view a simple list of names.
This raises an important question, though. Something for you to ponder long after we wrap up this discussion.
I love a good lingering question. Lay it on us.
Think back to that incredible institutional drama in 1913. The moment when the state officially appointed Franklin Potts Glass Sr. to a vacant seat, and the federal Senate absolutely refused to seat him, they locked him out.
The ultimate rejection of a state's authority.
It forces us to ask a deeply constitutional question. Who really owns that empty seat? If a state has the constitutional right and duty to appoint a representative to speak for its people, but the federal body has the ultimate, unchecked power to refuse to acknowledge that person. Wait, let me rephrase that. If they can just refuse them, where does the balance of power truly lie?
It's a massive contradiction.
It highlights a profound, ongoing tension between state sovereignty and federal authority. And it is a tension that is hiding right there, quietly documented in the footnotes of everyday history.
That is a fascinating thought to chew on. The push and pull between state and federal power crystallized in one single rejected appointment. You really cannot look at a simple data table the same way once you know the rich, complicated human drama backing it up. I want to thank you so much for joining us on this custom-tailored deep dive today. We hope we proved that there are no boring topics, only hidden stories waiting to be found. Keep exploring the margins of history, keep asking questions, and we will catch you next time.